I don't want to say, oh, $1 million a month isn't realistic, but sometimes you have to think, okay, well, what if I'm at zero right now in my business? What if I just make my first $10,000 a month? Right, so I think a lot of people mistake goals and milestones. Maybe that's your ultimate vision. You want to make a certain amount of money, but then you can say, okay, well, let me just make my first even $1,000, right? Then my next 5,000, then 10,000, and then continue to grow from there. And then it becomes more palpable. But if you're at zero, and you're like, I'm excited. This guy Alex motivated me. I'm going to make $1 million. It's a big gap, and most people that causes inaction. So we want to be practical in terms of how we make this happen. So this perfect time tax. Who here has heard of opportunity cost? Raise your hand. Who's heard of opportunity cost? Opportunity cost, I call it the perfect time tax because when people want to lose weight, when they want to improve their relationship, when they want to make more money, they're like, Alex, it's not the perfect time. I would love to, but it's not the right time. Call me in 5 years, then I'll be ready. And then it's always something. So the reality is your dream income, your dream life, usually is it's caused totally, the gap is caused by inaction. It's caused by waiting, I'm gonna do it January 1st, New Year's resolutions. That's why, what company sponsors the New Year's parade? Everybody knows. Planet Fitness as well, right? They know people are gonna sign up and never cancel, never show up. So most of the time, right, these people, they get motivated, but the action doesn't follow that. So you have to look at the perfect time tax, how much you're making now versus what you could be making, right? That is a gap. That's a real gap. Most people think my biggest expense is, what's your biggest expense?
The house.
House, okay. All right. What about you, sir? What's your biggest expense in life? Right there with a nice teal shirt. What's your biggest expense financially?
Taxes.
That's a great answer. Taxes? Yes, sir. Ignorance. He knows what I'm talking about. So I like to say perfect time tax. Ignorance tax is a little rough, but it's the perfect time tax. It's the gap between what you're making right now and what you could be making, and a lot of the time that's your biggest expense. Right? When I was starting out, I was making in my business sometimes $500 a month. Right? I was eating eggs and rice, like that was not good at the time. But I said, okay, but if I want to make $50,000 a month, I need to put all my money, my time, my focus, my effort into how can I bridge this gap, even slowly but surely. So I want you guys to write down what you're currently making and what your dream income is. And a lot of the time it's a big gap, right? And that's okay, but sometimes we never think about it. We put all of our time on, oh my gosh, I'm gonna save $500 this decade on interest by doing this and doing that. And it's not a bad thing, but that's where if you mix that with thinking, okay, how can I focus on what I'm making and what I could be making, at least you can see the gap, right? And sometimes you have to look over a long period of time and you think, okay, let's say you make even $5,000 a month, you wanna make 50, that is every single month. In that situation, 45 grand. The other one was 10,000 a month and you wanna make 50. So that's about almost 500 grand a year that you're paying for not knowing how to make your dream income. Over 10 years, that's almost $5 million, completely lost. And think about if you make that money and then you invest it, it's probably 8 million, 9 million compounded over time. So sometimes you have to sit down and think about that because a lot of people think, oh, I'm interested in building a business. I'm interested in making more money. It's like, interested is like, well, I'm interested in what we're gonna eat tonight after the speech. Like, you came to this conference, you spent money, you traveled, you could have been watching Netflix. You should be committed to not just mastering your money, but then mastering your potential, how much you could be making and what you could be doing. So I want you to write down what your gap would be, everybody, over 10 years of what you're making now and what you could be making, and just do the math real quick. Everybody here, you guys are great at numbers, so it's probably in the millions, right? And that's a problem, right? And at the same time, if you love your job and you're gonna retire soon, like, that's where Christie's, teachings and Velocity Banking, it says, hey, if this is what you're making, work with it and pay off debt as quickly as possible. But there's also a lot of her audience who has worked with her, they've paid off their debt, they've gotten more financially stable, now they want to get financially free, and that's what we're talking about. But sometimes, if you don't think there's a problem, you're gonna be like, I don't wanna listen to this guy, I'm gonna go on my phone. So sometimes you have to write down and be like, okay, like, that's interesting, but let's see if we can get committed. So you wrote down your perfect time tax. The unfortunate thing is I've had my business for 8 years. I mean, you guys see the revenue I'm doing. I've worked with many, many clients who, many of them are starting their business, right? So I think when you're starting your business, it's probably 90% psychology and 10% skills, right? 90% psychology because most people, they have the skills, they have the resources, they have the time. The fear of failure, the self-doubt, it's a killer. It kills anybody's dream because then they go on, I call it the but train, the BUT train, and they're constantly thinking, oh, I could do this, but it's not the right time, but I'm gonna do it next year. And they get on that track and it all boils down to the fear of failure. But I want you guys to think about true failure. Number one is never trying. Never giving yourself a fair shot at reaching your potential. Number two, it's meeting the person in heaven you could have been. Someone who took risk, someone who had courage. Christy had courage when she started with me. She said, no, Alex, I'm not working with you. You're a kid, what do you know? She literally texted me this whole long thing, and I said, I disagree, you're gonna work with me. Because I knew she had the skills, she had an accent that she thought was a liability, I thought it was an asset. Right? People like their, financial advice from their Tennessee and on. It's very comforting. So I knew she had the skills, she can afford it, like everything worked out, but she had the courage to say, you know what, even in the face of uncertainty, the fear of failure, self-doubt, everything, I'm still gonna take action. So I want you guys to think about that. What is your number one dream killer? What's your number one at night? You look in the mirror, what's your self-doubt? Right? You don't have to tell me, but write it down because if you can acknowledge it, that's the first step towards making progress on it. And again, more than anything, I've worked with people that say, I don't have the money right now, but I'm gonna make this happen. They've came back 3 years later and they've been crazy successful. So anything is possible.